So we'll be covering the story of journalism. This is welcome to the course. This is our first chapter, the story of journalism. And we'll talk about its history, some of the heroes, the legends, and the folklores, and about the main things that reporters can do, which is to make headlines, right? Capture readers' attention, and to get stories in on time, make deadlines. So it's a history, not a beautiful history, not an illustrious history, but a history of tabloid trash. So if you think back, those were the good old days. They weren't so good. They were just old. Tabloid trash, kind of like the National Enquirer. We're also looking at slimy sensationalists, as the book calls them, and drunkards, deadbeats, and bummers. Those were the reporters. Fascination with conflict, right? And getting readers and getting attention and selling. So don't over idealize the past. We've learned and we've hopefully evolved. History of heroes. This part you can idealize is that reporters risk lives to tell stories, right? You have to go out to the scene of the action, and often the action is conflict, often it's war and tragedy. And you have to be able to defend free speech. A lot of truths people don't want to hear or they don't want to let out. And that's so much of what a reporter does. The book talks a little bit about reporters and pop culture. I'm not going to get into them here too much, but you want to get a sense of them, movies, comics, and TV shows, and also know what you're interested in, expose yourself to some of these. Broadcast news, the movie, if you're interested in broadcast, All the President's Men, if you're interested in investigative reporting. Myths about reporters. I was going to kind of tell you from my own background what I thought was myths and what weren't. Female reporters are gutsy, idealistic, beautiful, and single. I think single, the last one, yeah, that tends to happen because it's such a demanding job. Although now I'm seeing at my old workplace at public radio, there are more mothers working there later in their careers. But when you get started, it's all consuming, it's demanding because it is now a 24-hour news cycle. You have to be on all the time to get many stories. Gutsy and idealistic, I think that is true, but I think that's transcends gender. I think both obviously men and women have to be. Beautiful broadcast news may be expecting you, but I was in radio, I could have a face for radio. Male reporters are surly, cynical loners. Some of them are. That's kind of a trait of some writers, but some women are too. But it does demand that you go out and you talk with people. So it demands that you overcome your shyness, not necessarily your ability to be alone, because writing will take a lot of time alone. Reporters routinely solve mysteries. I'd say not so much. We are trying to problem solve. We are trying to think about issues, but do we solve mysteries? Not so much. Ambush, dodge, and shout. That was my experience covering major stories where there were a lot of people on one story. Those were my least favorite kinds of stories to cover. Like in the courtroom, we'd all attack the lawyer or a politician speaking. There's some major news announcement. It was actually called a gangbang because we would all get in there with our microphones and televisions, and the television people would make the short radio people, stand down. But it was called a gangbang. So there are ambushes, dodging, and shouting. That does happen. Reporters drink at their desks. By the time I got into the business, that wasn't happening so much anymore, and that is the kind of thing that can get you fired now. Reporters have a liberal bias. I think sometimes that can be true. People go into the profession with an open mind and curious, and they want to learn things, and they may have a liberal bias. But I think as you go up through the hierarchy, it becomes more conservative. The owners are often more conservative. Like if you look at the Chicago Tribune, I would say that they are more conservative. You can look at their editorials to kind of check that out. Those are written by their editorial board. But often the publishers are very interested in money, and that's in making money, bottom line, and fairly conservative values. Okay, birth of journalism. Every culture speaks new ways to spread the news. In the very old days, you probably, before my time even, ancient clay tablets, Roman newsletters, and wandering minstrels who would essentially sing the news, come to your town and sing the news. There are some different views of history about the birth of journalism. Was it technological progress? What was the impact of bigger, faster presses? Well, one is that it allowed for more specialized form of expression, right? Just like the internet can allow for little niche publications or specific blogs, you had bigger, faster presses. You could have more narrowly focused kind of newspapers. It constantly evolving, reflecting, and shaping. So there's always this interaction between the public, the society, and the media. right? The media is responding to society, and society is responding to the media. And hopefully, as it should, it goes back and forth. And there's a quest for free speech, the struggle between authority and the people. And we'll see that at the beginning of the birth of our country, right, of journalism in our particular country. And certainly nowadays we see it as well. So we'll look at some of the specific instances. One would be the rise and fall of America's first newspaper, Public Occurrences, both foreign and domestic. Public Occurrences, spelled with a K, by Benjamin Harris, 1690, out of Boston. 4 pages, one page was blank, and it closed after the first issue. So not tremendously successful, but got things going. The Zenger trial and Freedom of the Press. This is Zenger was a journalist who published something in the New York Weekly Journal in 1734, published something about the corruption of the governor. And then the governor tried to sue, go take Zenger to trial. And the result of that case was that the belief that libel occurs only when the printed words are false, so not true, malicious with evil intent, and seditious, that the author is essentially being a traitor to the country. First newspaper cartoon. So again, these are some examples that you'll want to know for the midterm. Join or Die by somebody you all probably know, the guy with the lightning and the kite. Benjamin Franklin ran the first editorial cartoon in the Pennsylvania Gazette, and really talking about solidarity between the colonies. And this became the symbol of the colonies' fight for independence, Join or Die, and you can pick out a couple of these: New Jersey, New York, Maine, Vermont. And it was a potent symbol of the time. But it also indicates that journalism in America was not rooted in this objective, neutral tradition that we often pride ourselves on now. There's been some changes even recently on that. But I think you want to look at it where journalism came out of. There was a lot of patriotism and propaganda because it was in America rooted in the Revolutionary War. So it had a perspective that we were a voice in the call for independence. And they give you an example of the Massachusetts Spy in 1770, published by Isaiah Thomas. And please check out in your textbook the account of the Battle of Lexington, which is a mix of reporting and propaganda. Probably couldn't get away today in a mainstream publication. One of the major things that we'll be doing, or that I want you to have a sense of, both from the textbook and for the midterm, is the difference between ordinary newspapers and the penny press. Ordinary newspapers before that time, before it was kind of marketed for the masses, were 6 cents. Penny press, like it sounds like, is 1 cent, and you buy from a paper boy on the spot. Ordinary newspapers tend to have political commentary, trade statistics, poetries, letters, and gossip, not the stuff of mainstream newspapers today that may be included in some of them, but almost more magazine-like. Whereas the penny press was local news, crime coverage, human interest feature stories. News from documents, news from reporters, right? Penny press is news from reporters. Ordinary newspapers are news from documents, kind of rehashing things. Ordinary newspapers were old, stale news, which made sense because they were subscription-based and it may take a while for you to get that news. Whereas the penny press was breaking stories because it could cover breaking news because it was more agile. It was faster. And then ordinary newspapers were promoting one party, so not neutral, not objective, and penny press was independent of the parties. Okay. And like I was mentioning, ordinary newspapers had been funded by politicians or subscribers, whereas the penny press was funded by street sales and advertising. Yellow journalism, golden age, loud headlines, and sensational stories on sin and sex. Really do check out Citizen Kane. I think I have some clips up for you to see as well about, it's a fictional account of William Randolph Hearst, who was an actual person, and one of the kind of two key figures in the yellow journalism age. Lavish use of pictures, right? They knew that would get people. Sometimes those are fake, just like the news itself. They were Sunday supplements, and they had comics and features. And in fact, the yellow journalism is named for the Yellow Kid, which was a cartoon. Rumors are disguised as news. It actually led to a war with Spain. So the papers were so intent on getting readers and getting readers excited that they brought on a conflict. So Horace Greeley was one of the big names, liberal, crusading social reformer. We also have Henry Raymond and from the New York Times, Joseph Pulitzer, The World, and then William Randolph Hearst. And the last two I want you to really think of as kind of defining yellow journalism for us in the New York Journal versus with the Journal. And so Pulitzer spreads this crusading influence. So it's not, he starts to transcend the yellow journalism with his publication, The World, and bring on stories that issues behind them, crusades against corruption and government and business. And eventually he funds one of the top schools in journalism, the Columbia University School of Journalism, and establishes the Pulitzer Prize, which has a very highbrow reputation, as opposed to kind of the lowbrow yellow journalism beginnings, encouraging journalistic excellence. So it's the peak in there. News in the modern age, this is when it begins to shift. The newspapers shift again. Radio and TV bring an end to newspapers' media monopoly. And if I were to, usually in class, I would do some kind of poll about who's reading newspapers. Most of you are on the internet. The competition's too appealing. You're not getting the hard copies. But even back in the day, when radio came along, it kind of bumped out newspapers. When television came along, radio had sound and music, so that kind of trumped it. Movie newsreels added faces to voices. And by the 1950s, we had TV and now the internet. So all these things made kind of put newspapers in the background a bit, and newspapers had to figure out how to catch up, how to respond, and they did that with making tighter writing, so capturing the attention span, better formatting, right? So they've become visual in the way that the television was visual, and improved design. So sometimes they even looked like USA Today, for example, in 1980 was designed to look like a TV, right? And in the honor boxes that open and close and where you pull out the newspaper, they were it looked like it was a TV screen, and then you'd pull out the TV. So they're trying to work with the times. And now I think people look online first. The newspapers themselves are thinking online first about their content. And there's corporate consolidation, which just means that fewer and fewer organizations are owning more and more media outlets. And think about what that could mean. That will mean that there's less diversity of messages, right? If you've got the owners who are controlling the messages, right? Even though reporters may be independent, but they tend to kind of dictate policy and what's covered and where the money goes and to cover what kind of stories. So if we have fewer and fewer organizations that own media outlets, then we're going to have fewer messages out there. And it's a dangerous trend. Okay. So radio rules airwaves. 1927, 30 million people listened to Lindbergh's Homecoming. So again, we have a mass population at one time listening to the same thing. We start to have the first 24-hour news coverage. Television news comes of age. You've got some of these videos up in 1963 with the Kennedy assassination where they're actually not there, and they're looking at a photo of it because they didn't have video reporters there on time. Okay. Meanwhile, back at the newspaper, how's it responding? Well, it's no longer, as we were saying, America's favorite or first source of news, but it is becoming more factual and less sensationalistic, and it's using what's called the inverted pyramid, where you have a lot of information at the top and then scale down. So, and it's more readable. Okay, so we will pick up next week with Chapter 2. Thanks for watching.